Welcome to this session focusing on developing your childminding business. The aim of this session is to gain an understanding of the options available to extend your childminding business. The topics we will cover include business structures, employer responsibilities, business and finance, Ofsted, co-childminders, assistants and apprentices, and there will be some additional links and resources near the end of the session. Childminders are a really important part of our early years and childcare market and can provide the flexible solutions that parents need. Childminder services can also complement other provision, enabling childcare hours to be extended or taken at more unsociable hours to support parents' work patterns. The recent expansion of funded childcare for eligible working families highlights the need for additional childcare places for children aged 9 months old plus in the local authority area. The Childcare Sufficiency Report highlights key areas across East Sussex with a significant shortfall of places. Childminders can be responsive to supporting the national agenda of increased wraparound childcare for school-aged children. It's a good time to consider developing your childminding business to take advantage of these opportunities by working with another childminder, assistant or apprentice, or by working at an alternative location such as a village hall or a spare space within the school. The decision as to whether to work with a co-childminder, an assistant or apprentice is very much a personal one. It should be based on your personality, leadership style, the personal people you are considering working with, and the needs of your business. An EYFS leadership and management e-learning course is available on the learning portal to help you discover your leadership style. Working with a co-childminder may not necessarily be the best option if you don't have shared values and visions for the provision, or if you want full control of the business with clear lines of responsibility and the ability to lead practice. Equally, should you take on an assistant or apprentice, you become accountable for their practice and take on those responsibilities, and you may not feel comfortable about this. From September 2025, the EYFS statutory framework will be further strengthened around suitability, so please ensure that you refer to the changes. The Foundation Years website has a summary of those changes available to view, and you can view them on Changes to Early Years Foundation Stage Safeguarding Requirements, September 2025, Foundation Years. So by working with someone else, there are different business structures that you'll need to consider. So there's the sole trader option, which is known as being self-employed, and this is the simplest way of running your business, and you'll be responsible for completing a self-assessment tax return each year. There's the informal partnership, where partners would share in all aspects of the business. Both profits and liabilities are set out in a partnership agreement. However, as with sole traders, this does not have the benefits of a limited liability, which I'll explain shortly. Company partnerships. So partners would share in all aspects of the business. However, this is registered and governed by Companies House and has the advantage of limited liability. And then you've got the limited company. This is registered and governed by Companies House also. The main advantage are the prospects to potentially pay less tax, personal tax, and feasibly take additional benefits from the business, plus the reassurance of protection of limited liability. So limited liability is where a person's financial liability or risk is limited to a fixed sum, usually a minimal amount. Partners in a limited partnership or company are not personally liable for any debts of the company where they have acted responsibly and in good faith. So employer's responsibility. If you choose to employ a childminding assistant or apprentice, you will have employer's responsibilities, and you can view the government guidance for employing staff for the first time. So some of these responsibilities would include things like employment law, so that responsibility to comply with national minimum wage regulations, and also things like the entitlements around paid leave, so things like holidays, sick pay, maternity, paternity, redundancy. They would also be entitled to a written statement of employment, so a contract, and an itemised pay slip, so PAYE forms as well, so things like your P60s, your P45s and your P11Ds. There is some government guidance called P45, P60 and P11D Forms Workers Guide. They could also be entitled to a workplace pension if they are aged over 22 and earning over £10,000. You've then got the requirement to comply with the Equalities Act 2010 and things like safer recruitment, induction, training and support processes. However, you may choose to act as a contractor and buy in those assistance services for which they would invoice you. They will be registered themselves as self-employed and submit their own self-assessment tax returns. They would still be required to have the suitability checks outlined in the URFS, and this would include that letter of suitability from Ofsted and the EY2 form. You may also choose to work with a co-childminder. The benefits of that is they are registered separately with Ofsted and they would have their own relevant checks in place. The co-childminder again could invoice you for their services predetermined in a partnership agreement. Obviously, with self-employment comes that staff have their own freedom to set their own working hours and notice periods, and this might not fit your business needs. There is the self-employment employment check through ACAS and guidance, and then you have got the HMRC's, the employment status for tax tool, and that gives you HMRC's view of workers' employment status based on the information that you provide. And this may obviously help you with your decision. So for childminding assistants or apprentices, most of their training and development will be through your role modelling and your peer observations. You should obviously identify any development needs through your observations of practice, and from that create a tailored training and development plan for them over time. There are training courses on the East Sussex Learning Portal that you may also wish to include as part of their ongoing continuing professional development. So you should have a training plan for your assistant, which is reviewed at supervisions to ensure mandatory training has not lapsed. You've got obviously paediatric first aid that they will need if they're to be left unsupervised with children. There's the East Sussex County Council Safeguarding Children and Young People course, which should be completed, and your safeguarding policy should be shared as part of their induction, and any additional updates that you think they would need along the way. So food hygiene and allergy awareness courses may be appropriate if they'll be preparing food on a regular basis. If they're age 19 or above, your assistant may be able to access a funded level 3 in childcare and early years qualification. And obviously, sometimes that they need to undertake maths and English functional skills for those courses. An apprentice will have a structured training plan with their training provider that you should be able to support. You should be clear around your organisation structure from the outset as part of the assistant or apprentice's induction. You're going to be accountable for their practice and development, so you should be clear on what your expectations are, but build on like a team ethos. So regular supervision sessions are not only necessary, but they're also a statutory requirement. They should be formally recorded. You should ask your assistant or apprentice whether any personal circumstances have changed and there are any issues which may affect their suitability to work with children. So disqualification by association only applies to others living in their household and not the individual themselves. Supervisions provide opportunities to discuss any issues around health, well-being, child development, child protection concerns, and reflective practice. The assistant or apprentice should sign to agree that the supervision record is an accurate reflection of the discussions held. For employees, you may also want to consider having a code of conduct or something outlined within their statement of employment contract, and a disciplinary policy that follows a graded system of verbal and written warnings. You should also consider what you would do to ensure compliance with ratio requirements if you needed to dismiss someone instantly. So this links in with your risk assessment for employing additional staff. As with a co-childminder, working with an assistant or an apprentice can have a beneficial impact on occupancy. And the same considerations around the impact of quality and square footage apply. You should allow for additional investment in resources at the outset as your numbers increase, so things like cots, pushchairs, high chairs. You should decide from the outset your payment arrangements for the assistance apprentice, and you must adhere to minimum wage requirements. So, self-employed. Your assistant may prefer to be self-employed and work and will provide you with an invoice for payments. They would complete their own self-assessment tax returns and you would not have any employer responsibilities. But you should refer to the HMRC check for employment status tool for tax to check that the employment status is correct, as sometimes if you are given fixed days, fixed hours, it is deemed that you are employing them and they are not self-employed. Obviously, if they are self-employed, the assistant would not be entitled to any statutory employment rights, such as holiday pay, sick pay, redundancy, maternity, paternity, and they may not be satisfied with this option. And as previously outlined, if they're self-employed, their work hours and notice periods might not fit in with your business. So if you decide to look at employing an assistant or apprentice, you'll be required to register with His Majesty Revenue and Customs, so HMRC, as an employer. You'll have to produce payslips, calculate tax, pensions, national insurance contributions. Best practice is to usually employ an accountant. However, HMRC online systems are relatively straightforward if you choose to do this yourself. HMRC has a free tool that allows you to calculate salaries and reclaim any statutory allowances through PAYE, such as holiday pay or sick pay, and that is HMRC Tools and Calculators. HMRC also provide online help and deliver informative webinars, and you can look at help online for self-assessment, and you'll be able to find those. So you may obviously need to source an employer's pension for any employees who are over 22 and earn at least £10,000 a year, and they will need to make statutory contributions. The government's Nest pension scheme has no setup costs and is relatively straightforward to operate. You can find that at nestpensions.org.uk. So employed liabilities, obviously you need to consider your potential responsibilities in terms of redundancy pay, sick pay, maternity and paternity, as these could be quite significant, especially given the impact of children's immune system on adults supporting them. So you'll need to update your insurance company if you employ any assistants or apprentices. This is normally there is normally a small financial implication, but again, it's minimal. If you're working with a co-childminder, both insurance policies will have to be updated. Any apprentice is normally covered under their apprenticeship provider's insurance cover, and you should request to see evidence of this. Where your assistant, apprentice or a co-childminder is a key holder at your property, you should discuss this with your domestic insurance provider. You'll also need to make sure that you've got employer's liability cover in place. You should either display the certificate somewhere that everyone can easily access it in the workplace, or if you'd prefer not to have a hard copy on display, you could share a digital copy with your staff as long as everyone knows where to find it. And there's a website called What is Employer's Liability Insurance and Do I Need to Use It? Unbiased. If you're delivering any part of the early education funding, your employer's liability cover should be set to a minimum of 5 million and your public liability should be set at a minimum of 5 million to comply with the local authority's terms and conditions. You should check with your local planning department whether you need planning permission to expand. Obviously, the requirements for offset registration don't replace those other legal responsibilities that must still be met. So working with one or more childminders may mean you can increase the number of children you care for, adhering to ratios in the EYFS, but multiplied by those numbers of childminders. But obviously you've got to make sure you've got sufficient space. The positive financial impact of increasing occupancy on income levels is considerable, as your overheads and your costs do not significantly increase. A co-childminder partnership also allows your provision to claim early education funding for your own child under the others registration, where the co-childminder is not a close family member. It's important that your partnership agreement sets out all financial arrangements at the start. It's advised that you consult your accountant regarding financial matters, but you may choose one of the following options. So option 1 is to contract them for services to support delivery in your home. Option 2 is to employ them and maintain over control of your provision. And option 3, the most efficient way to operate as a co-childminder, is for you to both open a joint bank account together and employ the services of an accountant. In this case, all the income from parents and early education funding would be paid into this account, and all expenditure in relation to business costs would come out of this account. You should also decide how much you will pay yourselves each month and pay yourselves an income salary from that account. You should set out how surplus profits, so dividends, will be split and pay these accordingly, and they might be paid monthly, termly, or at the end of each year. The homeowner will obviously pay all the utilities personally and should be reimbursed the relevant apportionment from the business account. Alternatively, you may decide to apportion the assets of the business and profit so that the homeowner gets a larger proportion. This should all clearly be set out in any formal partnership agreement. You should also ensure that you have a shared financial ethos with your co-childminder in terms of reinvestment. You should also ensure you allow financial reserve to continually reinvest in the business, and each co-childminder will be responsible for submitting their own self-assessment return, tax return, and paying tax owed. So from the 1st of November last year, 2024, the Department for Education and Ofsted introduced new flexibilities that created a new category of childminder, so childminder without domestic premises, who work entirely from non-domestic premises. They increased from 3 to 4 the total number of people that can work together under a childminder registration. Those numbers include the childminder. And they gave childminders and providers of childcare on domestic premises more flexibility, allowing them to spend more time operating outside of the domestic premises in places such as community halls or schools. They increased the number of people needed for childcare on domestic premises to operate from 4 or more to 5 or more people providing the care. So childcare on domestic premises that were registered or applied to register before the 1st of November can continue operating with 4 or more people. So there are now 2 categories of childminder: childminder with domestic premises and childminder without domestic premises. Childminders who were already registered did not need to take any action in relation to these changes, and they'll be able to benefit from some of the new flexibilities. So all childminders can work with an additional person, so another childminder or assistant under their childminding registration, so allowing up to 4 people to work together in total. Childminders with premises can choose how much time they operate from their home or from non-domestic premises, as long as they spend at least some of their time operating from the domestic premises. So more than the existing 50% rule, and obviously that 50% rule has now been removed. Those childminders who do not want to or are unable to work from home can register for the new category, childminder without domestic premises, where they would operate entirely from non-domestic premises. So people who might benefit from these changes are those with issues and restrictions with covenants and new builds, people unable to own their own home or without suitable space in their own home, people who are maybe having issues with rental agreements or landlord disputes, and people affected by rising energy bills and costs associated within the home. So there are some limitations, and it's important to note that registering as a childminder without domestic premises, they're not allowed to operate from their own home at all. And this includes any pickups, drop-offs, or any holiday periods. The new category of childminder without domestic premises will therefore only benefit from those who cannot work in their own home for the reasons outlined above. The number for those providing childcare on domestic premises, as I've said before, has increased from 4 or more people providing care to 5 or more people. This is due to the increase in the numbers of childminders that can work with, so from 3 to 4. And these changes allow those who are already registered as childcare on domestic premises or who applied before the 1st of November to continue operating with 4 or more people. So things that you've got to consider is, do you have sufficient space for both adults and children? Does this space meet health and safety requirements as well as EYFS statutory requirements? Your planning regulations may need to be considered when you're looking to expand your provision. So this may include taking on an assistant and additional children. And if planning is required, this can take more than 6 weeks. You need to respect the impact of your expanded setting on the environment, the waste that you might produce, the noise that might be produced, and the parking issues that may come with the increased number of families accessing your provision. Ofsted ratios allow for each childminder assistant or appropriate apprentice to care for up to 6 children under the age of 8, but obviously there are limitations on those which are classed as young children. However, as I've said before, you've got to comply with those space requirements that are set out in the UIFS. You'll also need to consider health and safety around any possible changes, so that training that they might require, or for example, updating or creating new risk assessments, or if you need to display the health and safety poster, or you might provide staff with the equivalent leaflet. This flowchart helps explore the provider models available to consider and highlights the Ofsted registrations for the different models and which one that they would fall under. So a co-childminder can be left on their own with children for an unlimited length of time under their own Ofsted registration. They would be separately inspected by Ofsted under that registration, and they will need to demonstrate how they meet the requirements of the early years and childcare registers. A co-childminder may share the responsibilities of the business and establishing the provision. So where does this fit? Providers by law must inform either Ofsted or the childminder agency of anyone aged 16 years or over who lives or works on the premises where childminding or childcare on domestic premises takes place, so that they can check to see if they're suitable to be in contact with children. Ofsted require childminders to report new adults in the home, and they have an online link for this. If they are with a childminder agency, they would need to contact them directly to inform them. If the co-childminder is new to childminding, they may decide to complete a pre-registration course first, and they'll obviously need to make an online application to Ofsted. Once their application's been received, they will have a pre-registration visit from Ofsted where they will determine whether they are suitable to be registered as a childminder on the early years register. If the co-childminder has registered minded before, they will just need to confirm with Ofsted that they have changed premises from which they childmind it, and then Ofsted should link the two registrations together. So in theory, no pre-registration visit would be required. Co-childminders must work together to decide how they will comply with the EYFS statutory framework. They should choose how they split the workloads. They might do that by key children, with each person responsible for meeting the individual needs of these children. However, they might find that one childminder is better qualified or has more relevant experience in completing certain tasks. So that might be around developmental tracking, creative activities, outdoor play. So in those cases, it might be that allocation of tasks are done accordingly. As a co-childminder is inspected separately, they should be responsible for their own training plan. Training can be individually led based on specific interests, could be based on gaps in knowledge, or just to keep up to date. And this would be set out in their partnership agreement. In relation to mandatory training, it's ideal that one person would take responsibility for monitoring overall, as it can cause major issues for the business should any mandatory training expire. Obviously, one potential conflict in childminding partnerships is different approaches to continuing professional development and those various skill sets. There is also the consideration of differing Ofsted outcomes. So if one childminder was to achieve outstanding outcome, that potentially puts another under significant pressure. Think about what would happen if they were to get a lower grade and how that might be managed. The relationship you have with a co-childminder is key to reducing conflict in the partnership, but the overriding priority should always be what is best for the children. And obviously, frank discussions around this are needed. You may also decide to set out in your partnership agreement who has the deciding vote should there be conflict. So support that you can access could come from childminding agency, your local authority, membership organisations, further research, potential training, or attending events. Childminding assistants can be left on their own for no more than 2 hours in any one day, providing Ofsted and parental consent is obtained and that they have the valid paediatric first aid certificate, which is renewed every 3 years. A childminding apprentice over 17 years of age can also be left on their own for no more than 2 hours in any one day, providing that they also have that Ofsted and parental consent and the paediatric first aid. The EYFS states that at least one person who has a current paediatric first aid certificate must be on the premises and available at all times when the children are present. A childminding assistant or apprentice is inspected by Ofsted under the main childminders registration and they won't receive their own inspection. A childminding assistant or apprentice will need to complete the EY2 form online to be associated with the childminders registration. As the main childminder, you're going to have sole responsibility for the childminding assistants or apprentices practice. And you'll also potentially have those employer responsibilities to employee rights. Most assistants and apprentices do fall under the employed due to their working hours. The EYFS states that childminders and assistants must have sufficient understanding and use of English to ensure the well-being of children in their care. As part of this, you should also be satisfied that your assistants can understand and implement all of your statutory policies and procedures in English. Recruiting a childminding apprentice, there's obviously several training organisations and apprenticeships providers who can help you to find that best candidate. Apprenticeship training and assessments can be funded by the Apprenticeship Levy, and there is a blog from the Educational Hub called How Apprenticeships Funded and What is the Apprenticeship Levy. Department for Education currently fund 100% of the training costs for small employers, so those that are fewer than 50 staff, when they take on apprentices aged under 18. Also, employers do not have to pay employers' national insurance contributions for apprentices aged under 25 when the apprentice earns up to £4,189. There are other incentives if the apprentice has educational health and care plans or have been in care. Apprentices are accessed by their training provider to ensure they're suitable for progressing in their studies. You should conduct a formal interview and a trial period to ensure that they fit in with your childminding provision and that you feel comfortable with the person you'll be working for, and obviously consider the need for references. Other things to consider is less experienced staff can sometimes have picked up fewer bad habits and can be easier to coach into the ethos and practices at your provision. If the apprentice is over 17 years of age, they may be counted in your Ofsted ratios. You may need to carry out Ofsted DBS check, as some of the training organisations or apprentice providers' own checks won't carry across to your childminding business. The apprentice will need around 1 day a week out to attend training or college. If the apprentice is over 17 years old and is being counted in your ratios, this could obviously on your child numbers. So you'll need to establish that study pattern with a training provider from the outset. So neither an assistant or apprentice can be left alone until an enhanced DBS check has been completed. Neither the assistant or apprentice can be left alone until Ofsted is advised using their Report People online service. It's called Childminders Report New People in the Setting, and it's a government link. And a letter is returned from Ofsted returning their suitability to work with children. You should risk assess the impact of employing additional staff on your provision. You should risk assess the assistant apprentice being left unsupervised. You should have clear written policies in place when working with others, and ideally use the terminology any individual working with children to avoid having to update those policies if there are staff changes. You need to obtain parental consent for the children to be left with the assistant or apprentice, and you should clearly record any times you are leaving the assistant or apprentice unsupervised in your diary or register. If the assistant or apprentice is working with key children, their workloads can be increased over time and activity planning can be done together. The assistant may also be able to take responsibility for individual areas over time, so maybe maths or communication and language. However, you'll always be responsible for their practice and observing that practice on a regular basis, and maybe coaching and mentoring along the way to make sure the practice is up to the standard that you would expect. Consider holding half-termly staff meetings so that you can discuss activities, observations, interest, cohorts of children, safeguarding, perhaps specific children or individual case reviews. So now we're just going to go on to some of the links that you may find useful. So depending on how your childminder practice develops, you may want to consider membership to a national organisation. So these are some of the ones listed below. You have got ones like PACEY, so Professional Association of Childcare and Early Years. You have Early Years Alliance. You've got National Day Nurseries Association, Men in the Early Years, Out of Schools Alliance, and childcare.co.uk. Then there are obviously some employer responsibility national links. So there's guidance on employing staff for the first time, for registering as an employer, for checking the employment status. There is HMRC help and support. So if you're self-employed, so basic PAYE tools are available online. There's links for persons' legal right to work in the UK, making work life better for everyone through ACAS, guidance from the Equalities Act 2010, and health and safety, so the HSE simple health and safety guidance as well. So we've then got some resources. So the links on this slide relate to resources that are available to help with developing your business or supporting you as an employer. Again, if you're a member of the national organisation, they may provide guides and templates that you can use instead. So these resources are not recommended or endorsed by the local authority, but childminder guides. There's some new childminder setup guides, ACAS templates for employers. There's the parental hand guide. And then you've got ones like Twinkle with packs and templates around hiring childminding assistants and job descriptions, person specifications. So we hope you found this session useful and you'll be able to consider what next for your childminding business. For further information, please contact us through childcare support, and an early years officer or appropriate person will make contact with you. The email address is childcare.support@eastsussex.gov.uk.